Hello from Later TV. This is King Kool. Welcome to the top 10 best and worst films of 2019. Alright, I'm going to level with you guys. When I did the top 10, this was in 2019, so I'd already fallen behind for like 2 years. So I really didn't put that much effort into writing the best list. I just sort of ordered them out and then had like one sentence a piece. So this is going to be kind of meager this time, even more so than normal. I don't even know where this shirt is from. I got this when I got like a stack of black shirts to either to wear or to turn into masks. And this one's going to become a bunch of masks once this is all over. So I liked Knives Out a lot, and I really liked that it was almost like it was sort of unstuck in time, where it could have been set in like the 70s or the 80s or 1995 or 2010, and it probably would have worked pretty much the same way. I know there's things like smartphones and, you know, the alt-right that they reference. If you look up things from like the 60s and 70s and see what the what previous conservative movements had been referring to, it's all the same stuff. But then there's this discussion that they're talking about, oh, well, I don't like this guy and whatever, and they're clearly just talking about Trump, but they don't say it. But then they say, they put kids in cages for God's sake, which just nails this thing right to 2019, because not just is that like something that happened in that year or the year before roughly, but then, you know, right after this, that became not really that big of a thing when everything else going on after 2020 happened. So, you know, that was the thing about making fun of Trump at any point, was if you nailed out a particular thing, you can kind of, like counting the rings of a tree, you can see when this thing came about by what they thought was like the big scandal. Whereas like back in Obama's day, it was just like, hey, that's the time they made fun of him for wearing a tan suit. So yeah, that one kind of bumped that one off the, I don't know if it was even going to make the top 10 list, but I was like, no, that sucks. You don't have to be specific about this stuff, and doing so doesn't illuminate anything about that or illuminate anything about these characters. It just dates the movie. Like, you might as well bring them out a pair of acid wash jeans and be like, check out these new things I've got. Okay, so there's going to be people who go out and say, I find this ending disappointing. And it's like, have you been paying attention to the other two movies in this series? Like, say what you will about these other things, or Unbreakable, that was before, or actually pretty much right around the same time when the comic book movie thing started to sort of swell. I think it was 2001. And the other ones that came in later on were more responses to that. And this is now the final response to this extraordinary change in the superhero zeitgeist with what else? A crossover. At least 2019 had one good trilogy in the books. So let's also put our hands together and remember Bruce Willis's last good movie. Jeez, I didn't see that much good this year, did I? I think Frozen 2 is pretty good. Not the equally original, but the songs are still pretty good. Kristoff finally gets his own song. It expands the world in an interesting way. I like expanding the story outside of the Arendelle city limits, is sort of introduced like the local native population and a couple of other characters of a more diverse background. And you're probably thinking like, look, like Norway, which Arendelle's clearly based on, is about as white as a napkin. Why bother? It's like, because the world has a lot of different type of people in it. So let's tell all the stories, all right? What's the big deal? It also stands as a counterpoint to 2017's Ragnarok. With that said, like, there could be a world that was so corrupt that there was simply no point but to let it be destroyed and to start over. Where this one says, yeah, maybe the people who run a kingdom have done something terrible, and we can undo what they did, but the consequences of that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone in that town has to die. You know, there could be a way that we right the wrongs and still let all the villagers who didn't have anything to do with it still have their lives, you know? Of all the things I thought Disney was going to incorporate into Frozen 2, I didn't think one of them would be homeopathy. So when I wrote this list, the only thing I had written down for this movie was Jake Gyllenhaal. But yeah, you know, his version of Quentin Beck is just so darn compelling and interesting as he steps into the father figure role that has been vacated since Endgame. And honestly, we haven't seen a comic book character this compelling as far as not knowing where they were necessarily going to go with it up until they do, since I say The Dark Knight Rises with Marion Cotillard's character in that one, where when I saw the first trailer, I was like, is that this character? And it's like, oh, probably not. And then continue with the entire movie, and it's like, okay, because maybe they're not this character, until boom, it's like, yes, I take off the mask. Yes, I am this character. Of the 3 Spider-Man movies, I think this one is the weakest. But it's by no means bad. I think it's a lot of fun. Other reviewers have sort of said that it was just fine or whatever, and I thought it was a real thrill. I've been paying attention to Jillian Bell ever since about 22 Jump Street. She's a remarkable and very funny actress. She's even good in not that great movies that she's been in, like Office Christmas Party, where she plays a surprisingly vicious drug dealer. But I'm really glad that she's got a starring role in this, based on a true story romantic comedy, which really sounds like a bad combination, but this one works quite well. In this romantic comedy, it's not about being good enough that a guy loves you, it's about loving yourself. And if you're wondering why I'm not moving, I'm attempting to get the Guinness record for standing perfectly still. I had to do it while making this video. It's not the fact that I accidentally somehow skipped over recording this, and I'm just recording this into my camera right now just to get it over with because I cannot be bothered to put everything back together. It's definitely not that. I'm going to go sit and see if I can get this here Guinness record, even though Guinness records don't mean anything. A movie that absolutely mercilessly mocks the way that fascist movement has sort of wiggled its way into power at a certain time in our history, and how utterly childish the entire belief system is. Children do sometimes get swept up into movements like this, just in the sense of wanting to belong to something or want to be part of the in-group. Or sometimes it's aspirational for young men with low physical acumen to look at the perfection that they could achieve through this power that this belief system allegedly grants them. But just as many children just see right through it, and they see it for the nonsense that it actually is. I only hope that we can continue to resist that siren song. Some of us, too many of us, have proven too weak to do so. Alright, I thought this one might have been this future fiasco in the making, with Edward Norton playing this sort of twitchy detective with Tourette syndrome who has lots of tics and phrases and things that he says. So I was thinking, oh boy, but I still went and saw it, and I'm glad I did because this movie is excellent. I should have known Norton would be able to play this in a way. It's a little mannered, but it is also compelling and realistic. Edward Norton has this reputation of being kind of difficult to work with, but he's still working for a reason. That's because, he's really good. It's also a noir movie set in the 30s, I believe it is, where the fact that it's set back then totally makes sense because it talks about the enormous social changes that were going on at that time, with Alec Baldwin's character as a stand-in for, who's the historical guy who was the guy who was changing everything in New York and sort of turning it into the monstrosity that it became. And he's a sort of a stand-in for that guy. It was Moses something, I think it was. I don't remember. Men like that man Baldwin plays in this era, were in the business of world making, but in the way, certain people get in the way, and yet it takes someone like Norton to sort of follow up and make certain that the people crushed under this giant machine aren't left behind. Maybe this is Bruce Willis's last good movie. This came out after that, and he's in it for 4 minutes, so. Did you know people don't like Awkwafina? I don't get it. Even when I saw her in Ocean's 8, was the first thing I ever saw her in, I was like, I bet she can be good in something else. Boy, howdy was I right. Like I said in the previous video where I was unimpressed by Bao because I didn't understand anything new about a Chinese-Canadian immigrant's culture based on that film because it just didn't include anything. Not the case this time. The Farewell is totally about the Chinese's approach to that ever-universal subject, death. Obviously, this movie has more room to play around with than a short does, but it has the Chinese national parents, I do believe they were born there, and then they have Awkwafina, who was born in America, and there's sort of conflicting ideals as far as what they should be doing, as far as the push against these two cultures and things. And I think the farewell was terrific. I actually went up to Boston to see it, and then it came to my local theater in a week later. That happens to me a lot. So I haven't done that in a long time, so I probably won't. Once it happens, it'll go right to someplace closer to me, and I'm like, ugh. So fair warning to you, apparently if you've seen every Quentin Tarantino movie, that means you've already seen Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Let's just say you've seen them all except this one. Apparently he pulls a trick in this movie that he's pulled in a different movie that I haven't seen. Because I haven't seen a lot of Tarantino because he can be very violent. And I used to get, I still am kind of sensitive about it. I'm getting better as time goes on. So he pulls a certain trick in this movie that he's pulled before. So you might not like it as much as I did. But this one, obviously, for me, it was the first time seeing this, and so I really enjoyed it. This movie is not just about the golden age of cinema in the 60s, but also about the rise of television, as we have our struggling actor and his good friend stunt double, who are both kind of jerks, but we kind of sympathize with their stories as they try to move through this new era and sort of troubling figures that emerged in the 60s. Okay, this one we're going to go a little longer on. The theme I want to do for this one was to find like 2 movies in the year in the same category that I could have, okay, is it this one? No, it's this one. You'll see a little bit more of that on the worst list when I do that. But this one was going to be filmmakers whose previous work I hated, and then the next one I loved. And so this year there was also Robert Eggers, who did The Witch from 2016, which I hated. But then this year he did The Lighthouse, which is great. Didn't quite make the top 10, but I definitely recommend you see it because there's nothing else quite like it. With this absolutely amazingly beautiful black and white photography on like this super old film with like the incredible grays and sharps and muddy blacks just everywhere. Like this movie looks incredible. No one will ever make a black and white movie that looks like this again because nobody else will bother using this like super old techniques. Unless Eggers does it another time, but it's a possibility. Apparently after The Northman didn't do good, he just is not making any more big things of that scale with that kind of money. So people loved that one. I didn't actually catch that one. So okay, there were these filmmakers called the Safdie brothers who made a movie called Good Time. And I hated that one because it's just a movie about a wretch going around and abusing people and using people, and nothing is really accomplished or changed. He's just sort of a louse, and it's not like illuminating or encouraging. I mean, as I said at the time, it says that crime doesn't pay, but that's not really enough for a central theme for a picture. Let's just say for a moment that at a certain time in my life, I could see when people were leaving certain movies at the theater, and you'd occasionally see like 1 or 2 people walk out of something. They'll walk out of Moulin Rouge because they're old, they're not expecting it. Or a lot of people came out of American Sniper just racked with emotion, like just completely shook. Like, I got to get to the bathroom and chill for a little bit. Like, can't take it. And I was like, my goodness. And that was the biggest one I ever saw until Uncut Gems, where I saw at least a dozen people leaving that movie early, losing it within a half an hour or an hour. They just could not take it anymore and just left. But why? Well, it's because this movie is like a gigantic pressure cooker that just keeps crushing you. This movie is like watching someone take a bolt and turn it the wrong way, and then do it again, and then continue to do it, and then keep pushing and pushing and pushing until the spanner is bending, the bolt is creaking, the entire thing is shaking, and continuing to push it and push it and push it until you really are just thinking, what on earth is even happening? What's going on? And this movie is just killing you with dread and horror as far as like, how has this guy gotten this guy into this situation? How could he possibly get out of it? And even once, perhaps when he's almost out of it, he jumps right back in and keeps turning the spanner and gets another spanner to tie to it and keeps turning it. This movie is absolutely unbelievable as far as like the dread it just crushes you with. I didn't like Good Time because it was about a bad guy doing bad things to neutral parties, to bystanders, to security guards and things like that. I loved Uncut Gems because for the most part, the people that this character hurts in his travails are either, family members who I guess have signed up for it, which that sucks, but, that's the one thing he sort of regrets. Other fellow bastards and gangsters and other people, or criminals, or other people who are all swimming in the same sea as him. Good Time is about hurting neutral people. This guy really only hurts other jerks or himself. This is undoubtedly the best performance of Adam Sandler's career. Like, if this was earlier in his life, this would be career-making and career-changing. To the point where I was almost like, he almost might as well retire, because, like this movie would tell you, it's always good to go out on top. Look, of course it's Endgame, but again, that's paying off 10 years of continuity and also paying off to the sort of trick that they pulled for Infinity War, where that movie turned to The Empire Strikes Back and now get a Return of the Jedi. It's just this, 7-layer cake of fun. So, yeah, that's my favorite movie of the year, but again, that's not an interesting choice, so I'm not going to pick that for number 1. Then there was John Wick 3, which didn't find a place anywhere else on the best list, but I can't give it the top spot because it's kind of not as good as the other two. It's still quite good, don't get me wrong, but this was the first time I started to question some of the developments about the world and some of the character choices, and even some of the choices by the actors. There is a performance in this one that, even on the sort of generous scale of sort of a corny, weird, and sort of fantastical movie like this, I was like, this actor is not working and they're not getting the direction. What is going on here? My normal definition for the best movie of the year is the movie that made me the happiest. So what movie did that? Oh, I can't give it to Cats. But do not get me wrong. I loved every stupid second of that movie. I had a smile on my face for days after that because I could not believe they made something so ridiculous. I was thrilled that something like this awful and ridiculous and misguided had made it to a theater in its shape. Like, I don't think we'll ever see something like that again, especially post you-know-what in 2020. I don't know if we'll ever see something this big and misguided ever hit the big screen like this again. If this was a list of movies that were both bad and good, this would be at the top. So what is worthy of the top spot? Alita is like the anti-Ghost in the Shell, where a competent and fun-loving filmmaker makes a movie that is light and exciting rather than ponderous and smothered by its own alleged intellectual significance. The Alita anime isn't as important as Ghost in the Shell was, but that means it got to be fun and light and zip around. Yeah, some of the CGI is a little weird. Like, I think they reduced the size of Alita's eyes to make it look not quite so alien, but I think, considering that she's on screen all the time and always looks like that, I think the effects are much better than they are in Ghost in the Shell. Mostly this can be credited to Robert Rodriguez just being a filmmaker's filmmaker, as far as like, okay, he's not really buried in pretension or anything. He's just like, okay, well, want to make Alita into a movie, what pieces do we keep, what pieces do we not? As opposed to just, reading like a Cliff Notes about the significance of Ghost in the Shell and being like, we have to have these sort of themes or whatever, and just get crushed under all these big phone books of all your alleged intellectual value. So that's the thing about Robert Rodriguez, is he just sort of knows how to make something like this. It's just like, how can this be this hard to do this? When this one is just so light and zippy, it's almost amazing. That's why I want to give it number 1 of the year. It's a blast. And I didn't need to watch like 20 other movies to support the whole thing at the end of it, like with Endgame. But, I mean, still, like, we know it's Endgame, but I'm giving it to Alita, just to be more interesting. And now, on to the worst list. Check out this vertical filming we're doing here. Yeah, check it out. We're on an app. We're doing vertical. I'm so far back, I had to put on regular pants. Like, look, you can see, like, my pockets and stuff. I don't like this, but whatever. I'm just trying to mix it up. Okay, so The Good Liar is actually a pretty good movie, and to team up, Helen Mirren and Ian McKellen is pretty great. But spoilers for this entire movie. If you want to see it, just see it. But so at the very beginning, it's about them two finding each other on like an online dating website or something, and they specifically mention that it's 2006. I'm like, what a weird time to specify this. Was that when the book was set or something? I suspect it was. I do believe this was a book. The movie's very booky, in a way you'll see. So these two meet and whatever, and look, and it turns out that not only is Ian McKellen, a bastard in this movie, and a thief, and a murderer. He's also a Nazi youth rapist who, betrayed Helen Mirren's family as a youth. And this whole thing is a way for Helen Mirren to get back at him after all this time in a way it's almost like Death Note. It's so like, I planned everything kind of thing. And there's one moment at the very, very end where she sort of loses the upper hand for a moment, but then is saved. But this movie is just like, it's so, I'm not going to say it's obvious because it's not really clear when this is happening, where exactly this is going. I'm not going to say that it's obvious or that it's cliched, but it's just like putting a row of wooden ducks and just hitting them at the target game at the carnival, because it's just a little too easy to make him not just bad, but every kind of bad. This is the reason the movie takes place in 2006, is because they had to have been born in like the 30s or something. So they were like 10 or 12 or teenagers in the early 40s. Because if it was set in 2019, they would be like 100. So, I mean, Ian McKellen played a 90-year-old version of himself in Mr. Holmes. That's a good movie. So The Good Liar is like fun as it goes through it, but when it kind of reveals what it was up to the entire time, I was just sort of like, okay. It's still fun, but it's very, for something that sort of wants to be like, toothy and sort of nasty and like really relish on revenge, like at the end of the day, they've made a guy who's so bad that it's like sort of almost like it's makes something so simple that you're kind of like, okay, well, this is almost like candy-like as far as, being cartoonishly bad. So I think it kind of, it's an okay movie. Like, up to when it finally got to that twist where it turns out, oh yeah, she knew the whole time, is like, that's just kind of a bummer. And it doesn't all the intrigue leading up to it just kind of just goes like letting a balloon out. So I still think it's good, but I think it's a waste of the two of them, especially in their twilight years, where we'll probably never see them team up again, unless Ian McKellen joins the Fast and the Furious or something. All right, when I wrote this list, I put How to Train Your Dragon 3 as number 10. People say this is the worst of the three. I still think 2 is worse. I think the first one's fine. And I subbed out that one back in my list in 2014. And as I'm looking at this list, I know people love the How to Train Your Dragon movies, but whatever. This still just strikes me as wrong to do this. So I have no rancor left for those movies. They're done. They're gone. Hiccup has a beard now and kids. Good for him. Everyone has to have kids at the end of the movies. So yeah, I went back and looked at like the 70 pictures I saw in 2019. And I looked for another candidate for just to fill out the bottom of the bottom 10. And I think one jumped out. Do y'all remember Vice? I don't know if it was 2019 or 18, but it's the movie where Christian Bale, of all people, plays Dick Cheney. Does a great job. Obviously, Christian Bale always does a good job. If you told me like that thing in The Big Short where Michael Burry's eye was always pointing in the direction was just because Christian Bale injected curare into his optic nerve to like put it out of sorts for a couple months, I would buy it. But anyway, he plays Dick Cheney as the suspiciously powerful vice president. And he's doing kind of the same things he did in The Big Short, but the fact of the matter is that like the things he's explaining just aren't as complicated as the stuff in The Big Short. So it's like, well, why would a man want to accrue power? And why would this guy who has connections to these war companies want to do this? It's like, yeah, it's not algebra here, all right? It's not hard. So yeah, that movie just kind of collapses on itself. But maybe we'll see something good from Adam McKay in the future. Ha 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 ha. Bombshell was in a similar vein, where it was about all the interchangeable bleach blonde anchors that exist on Fox News, and how a lot of them faced horrible abuse at the hands of Roger Ailes. So the movie focuses on Megyn Kelly, who has found herself unable to support the Republican nominee, and found herself ousted at Fox News for that. So where did Megyn Kelly finally wind up? CNN. And apparently Chris Wallace did this at like the end of 2021, where he left wherever he went to go somewhere else. And that really just sort of shows what a dance this all is. Again, all the changes is the uniforms. Like, these anchor people just want to be personalities on television and will say whatever the teleprompter says to them and wear whatever uniform it is. It's literally like getting traded to another football team. It means that little to them, all the political stuff that they talk about during the show. Don't get me wrong. Roger Ailes was a real monster, and his downfall was richly deserved. But making a movie where Megyn Kelly is like the hero, why don't you go ahead and read some of her tweets at any point and see, how you feel about her as a protagonist in this, even in the specter of people like Ailes and that candidate that she could not support. But all the other conservative stuff, that's all fine. It's just specifically this one guy. It makes you sort of think that maybe it wasn't that she really necessarily opposed Trump specifically for being a jerk, but the fact that having Trump as a candidate would make conservatism unpalatable, and that didn't square with her worldview. I don't know. I'm going too far with this, but it doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is that she sucks. So does Ailes, so does Trump. Making a movie where Megyn Kelly is the good guy is like making a version of Angels in America where Roy Cohn is the good guy. So I think I talked about this in a previous video, but if the Lego Movie 2 was the Lego Movie 1, we'd all look at that and we'd say to ourselves, that was a pretty good Lego movie we just got. It's not as good as the first one, but really the fact of the matter is, what is? The Lego Movie, the original, is just about the best kids movie of the decade. Even with the disaster that was the Lego Ninjago movie, the competitors still have to just go out there and prove just how hard it really must be. Even with the theming of them moving through the different worlds of Playmobil, this whole thing feels like it was just made with a bunch of different sets that don't go together. Which, could have a nice anarchic feel, but really it's more just like, well, now we're here, and now we're here, and it's more like they just didn't have an idea that would stretch through the entire picture. When I had to go back and check this, because you can apparently stream this one free on Tubi, I think it is. I thought there was only a song at the beginning and then no other songs in the whole movie. No, this movie is a musical, which really was like the one thing that the Lego Movie wasn't, but some executive must have been like, it's a kid's movie, it's gotta have the songs in it. I mean, these songs are awful, but the reason why I thought the first song was the only song was because that's the only one that happens in the wraparound live action segments. And it's so awkward and lame that the other ones really didn't compare as far as that goes. But like, there's the fairy godmother character who's played by Meghan Trainor, and so she sings a song. It's like, all right, so yeah, there's other songs. I just completely forgot about it. This is the thing about doing this like 4 years later. Oh yeah, and I forgot, like right after that super awkward live action song was right when the police show up and tell them that both their parents died. And it's a really like enormous gear shift into this maudlin nonsense, and it's like, oh my god. They get beamed into the Playmobil set, and then they go through their terrible shtick and meet stupid characters, and like, not as good animation. Like, even the mouths are like sort of tweened so that they move smoothly, but in the Lego Movie they didn't bother with that because it just made it look better. It's almost like South Parkian or something, and it just makes it look like almost any other animated movie without using the limitations of the way they move in any sort of thing. Like, we see her like bend the elbow of her Playmobil body, even though they're not supposed to do that. They just sort of cheat that in the Lego Movie, and they kind of have sometimes like the arm will move in a way, like lift it in a way that it doesn't naturally. And you just sort of do that, but in this one it just looks so cheap and bad. I think they only did the tedious live-action wraparound nonsense because the Lego Movie had live-action segments. Well, literally, if Lego jumped off a bridge, would you do it? Probably. Must I go on? This is an obvious knockoff and imitator with none of the soul or the charm of the original. Just sort of sucking away at it and pulling money out of it the way like a lamprey sticks to the bottom of a much larger predator. And somehow surviving on the tiny bit of money that it can suck out from unfamiliar grandparents attempting to fulfill social responsibility. Hasn't that been the story for Playmobil for the last 40 years? The only good thing about this movie is that I found out that some people apparently pronounce it Playmobil. You say Playmobil, and I say Playmobil. You say Playmobil, and I say it correctly. Playmobil, 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 Playmobil. Don't watch this movie, it sucks. Oh, there's always some bad action movie to sort of pad out the worst list. And it really sucks when it stars people that I like. I really don't want to say that this is better than the two McG ones they made in the early 2000s, because I don't really like those. And those are crass and exploitative and dress-up-y Barbie dolly. You know, the action is all very floaty. It's you know, deliberately sort of exploitative and, you know, kind of gross and video gamey. You know, it's just those movies are not good. But the fact of the matter is that was three actresses who were at the top of their game having fun. You know, it's a little salacious, but at a certain point, these women who are at the top of their careers get to choose how they get to have fun and how they want to be presented in this way. And I feel like a scold for telling them not to have fun in that way. But in order for this movie to be better than those movies, they need to take out the sleaze and replace it with something? This really just feels kind of hollow. Right after the opening credits start, they have the scene where it shows a bunch of women in like mortarboards and in fields and things, and we're like, movie, we get it. Women can do anything. Can they make a good action movie? Can these women make one? Evidently not. I love Elizabeth Banks. I really wish this was better. I'm going to go off script for a second here because I don't remember. In the 2000s Charlie's Angels picture, they didn't use guns because I think Drew Barrymore didn't want them to use guns. They started using Kung Fu. Remember, this was right after The Matrix. Like, yeah, we use Kung Fu. And as dumb as all that is, I'm like, okay, I get for the reason for not wanting to use guns. I don't think these ones use guns either. I actually don't remember. I think it might literally be like, well, they don't use guns and they don't use like crazy Kung Fu. And I'm like, I don't really feel like they've been left to do almost anything. So it's one of the things where it's like, it's just, there isn't enough sort of zip in the action, or the three actors they have, look, and they're all good. I don't remember who the third one was. Kristen Stewart and that girl from Power Rangers in Aladdin, I don't remember her name, but her, they do okay, but I don't think any of them are, they're not like boxers or something where it's like, okay, well, there's something to sort of ground it. And that doesn't matter when they're floaty wire-foo nonsense that anybody can do, and that's, you know, when you can be anything. So again, we're taking away the things that made the first one kind of sleazy and replacing it with nothing. I almost left this completely off the list because there's a point towards the end where there's like the magical MacGuffin and he's like, set the thing off and then let this thing's radiation kill you or whatever. It's like, okay. So she turns it on and then the bad guy leaves, and then later on when they finally get out of there, they're like, don't you have to turn the thing off? And she was like, no, I just turn the lights on the thing and make it blink. And I'm like, oh my God, like that's a good line. And obviously it was one of these things where it's like, why would you do that? And it's like, oh, she didn't. So that literally just about saved that from the worst list, but I still think this is pretty bad. So yeah, Charlie's Angels replaced like huge stars with silly action and turned it into stranded new stars with boring action. And I really kind of feel like I want to go back to the exploitation. And then I remember, like, Hobbs and Shaw. This is a movie that's sort of similar to Charlie's Angels in the sense of how superhuman these two come across. The problem is that, like, for some reason, like, having these two on their own, these two characters are just the biggest anuses. These guys are just awful. I like Jason Statham, and I like The Rock. I've liked them in things most people don't like them in. But together, like, these two characters just don't carry an entire movie. And I think they spent a lot more money and tried harder to look dumber than they do in this movie. So, you know what? I'm calling another audible. We're going to knock Charlie's Angels off this top 10, and we're going to put in Hobbs and Shaw instead, because that spent more and was a greater sort of cinematic waste in this thing. And again, it's only a thing because apparently The Rock doesn't want to work with Vin Diesel anymore. And so yeah, leaving the Fast franchise, like, screw you, Vin Diesel, I'm going to have my own franchise with Blackjack and Triominoes. And then you make a movie that's worse than all the other ones. Yeah, I'll give this one the spot on the list. I'll be nice to Charlie's Angels this time, because we know we're not getting another one of those. That made like $45,000 at the box office. It didn't do a cent. Okay, people ripped on Replicas a lot, and like Replicas isn't like good, but so it's a movie about this like mad scientist who has these like pods you can grow clones in if you have like the memory of people. You can put them in there, and like he loses his entire family in a car crash or something, and so he steals these pods to bring his family back, but then he's one pod short, so he has to, you know, keep that one in data storage, and apparently like the data storage isn't permanent, so like delaying on this could mean that that family member does not get another chance at life. So he literally has to draw a name out of a hat for whichever, because obviously he can't choose, so he has to pick randomly. And he has to choose whether his wife, his son, or his daughter may not get a chance to come back. People criticize Keanu Reeves all the time. And, like, he's occasionally had performances which are less good than others. People like to point at, like, Dracula or something, which was very early on in his career. But as he's progressed, especially if you watch like, the behind the scenes for the Matrix movies, he cares so much about giving a good performance. If you know a little bit about Keanu Reeves' personal life, which you can look it up if you want to, but maybe the scene where he can't bring back a member of his family who is gone has a little more resonance if you know what he's been through. Yeah, I'm supposed to be talking about Angel Has Fallen, huh? I don't think it's as bad or as nasty as London Has Fallen, but it's almost entirely perfunctory. It starts with one of those scenes where it's like, hello, very good friend who I haven't talked about in the previous two movies, but is here now. And it's like, I wonder if he's going to turn out to be a bad guy. Please put your hands together. Welcome to the Internet Players!
Hey, look who it is. It's my good friend, not the bad guy, Dr. Eyeballs. Hello! Dramatic 10. Oh, hello, hero. Good to see you. I'm definitely not the bad guy. Hey, buddy, put her here. Okay? We still are longtime friends. And I'm definitely not the bad guy of this film.
I mean, they had to know he was a bad guy. He's played by Danny Houston. Somebody needs to cast Danny Houston as like a complete red herring, where it's like, yes, I'm totally not the bad guy, and it turns out he totally isn't. They did that this year with Captain Marvel, with Ben Mendelsohn, who, you know, usually plays bad guys, and he's playing like the Skrull leader, and then they bring him in, and it's like, oh, he's not the bad guy. It was a twist. And it's like, that's probably the best like part of Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel didn't make either list. It certainly wasn't going to make the best list, but it can't make the worst list. It's just not really that. Even the bad parts aren't really that bad. It just kind of, there's one moment, I'll mention this, the moment where she's fighting on the ship and they start playing that No Doubt song, I'm Just a Girl, and they don't even have the nerve to like edit the fight scene to the beat of that song. You can imagine that, right? Have the fight scene go with it and then make it look like he did it on purpose, and not that the editor was just getting cute, because that was the one moment I was like, I think I hate this. But, you know, I mean, that's probably the worst moment in the MCU so far, but it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't have weight. It doesn't change anything. Boy, I sure talked about Angel Has Fallen a lot. There's a post-credit scene in that movie. There's like a post-credit scene that's like a joke, because they got Nick Nolte as his dad. It's good to see Nick Nolte again. And they do this whole thing, like, you wouldn't believe me if I told you. It's so dumb. Remember when I said, oh, if the Lego Movie 2 came out now, and it was the first Lego movie, we'd be like, that was a fine Lego movie. Yeah, if this Hellboy came out in 2006 or 7, like before the original Hellboy came out, and that was our first Hellboy movie, we'd be like, this is awful. I know they're leaning into the horror tropes and stuff, but there's still just a lot of clumsy execution with this whole thing. Poor David Harbour isn't allowed to be that funny in this because he's such a teenager in this. He's just sort of screaming like a teenager might about certain things. So it's really just not a great version of this character. There's a moment of vulnerability where at the start he's like trying to hang up on his phone with his hand of doom and cracks the screen of his phone, and then tries doing it with his other human hand and does it again. And it's like, and that's funny. The movie needed more moments like that. They also just make like really dumb decisions, like there was old photographs of like people with the ectoplasm coming out of their mouths and showing the spirit. And these are like these hoax photographs from like the 20s of how ectoplasm would work. And the thing is there's like you had to look at how that looks in like not either a fake photograph or in a comic panel, because it looks so damn stupid that way. It didn't always emerge from the mouth or whatever. It could be from somewhere else, but they had to like change that up. And there's a lot of like retelling of the plot of the original and this other stuff. And it's like, it has been a bit since we've seen it, but well, like we all know. At the very end, he's got like the bad guy's head, and he just goes, oh, you should quit while you're ahead, chucks it. And I'm like, this moment needed more more like trying not to be cool. As far as what it should have been is like, he just throws her head in the pit. You should just quit, Chuck. Thing closes up, and before it closes up, he runs back. Oh no, I should have said you should quit while you're ahead. Dang it. Thing closes up, and it's like, man, because that's funnier. Like, once you, again, I had this theory about the 2016 Ghostbusters. Once you try to look cool, you're not cool. And doing that is like, that looks like you're trying to be cool, and you're not cool. So if you can't look cool, just be funny. So, like, Hellboy is a giant disappointment, and not just because it's grisly or whatever. That fight scene with the Giants is pretty rad, but otherwise, this movie stinks. My brother sometimes sees the superhero movies, and I was kind of like, should I tell him to see Shazam? It's just okay. And then Hellboy came out, and I said, go see Shazam. Why not? I have 2 number 6s on this list. I did not notice it until I was editing it for this in 2023. Take Hellboy off the list. I'm not that mad about Hellboy. We'll put this one on here instead. Some movies are buoyed by excellent casts and performances, but if the story they're telling just isn't that interesting, sadly, it just doesn't come together. Black and Blue has a crackerjack premise about a black police officer who has body cam footage that she has to get back to the station to show the evidence of a police officer committing a crime, and how so many other police officers are trying to stop her from doing this for mysterious reasons. I'll remind you, this is 2019. They didn't come up with all cops are bastards in 2020. All right, that was long, long before then. So needless to say, the message of police brutality is an important one, but to then put it in this sort of story that's more like an action movie than anything else is really kind of undercutting of the messages they're trying to say with these sort of cartoonish bad guys in this thing. Like, maybe the message was just too good to use in an action movie this lightweight. And it all probably could have been avoided if it wasn't for the way they chose to end this movie, which we've seen in another picture not that long ago. Please put your hands together and welcome the inanimate players.
Oh, at the end of the movie, and yet here we are in trouble. The bad guy has us at the end of a gun. What'll we do? Save me.
Yes, you fools may have stopped my plan to fill Enron Stadium filled with soup, but I at least have a gun, and I will shoot you with it. Can't you tell I'm holding a gun? By this close-up of me holding a gun, and the fact that my hand is definitely pointed towards you? I could just, wait, what are you doing? Oh. I can do that? Wow, I'm a better actor than I thought. So yeah, look as I point this actual gun at you. And, say goodbye to, life.
Looks like this is it. I'm sorry, Candy. I could not save us. Huh?
Ow! I've been shot. But I couldn't have been shot by Hero, because for the first time in the last 80 minutes of this movie, he did not have a firearm. So who could it have been? Who shot me? The editor did not reveal my presence until now. Confound! I forgot you were in the movie because you were gone for the entire third act.
We, the Batman, weirdly in this scenario, represent the police, even though we are vigilantes. But we will be taking you into custody. You really couldn't have me move or say a single line this whole thing, you bastard?
Have you seen that ending before? You might have. It was at the end of Paul Blart Mall Cop and Rush Hour 3. To end this allegedly serious movie about like police overreach and brutality, it'd be like if Heat ended with Al Pacino getting run over with a steamroller. Defund the police. More like defund this movie. Got him. Also defund the police. But give them body cams first. So here's a secret trick you might not know if you don't see that many movies. And maybe these things have changed since the pandemic because that just sort of warped everything, so who knows. But the rule of thumb was if a movie came out on Christmas and it hadn't been like previously released, we're not talking about it just getting to certain markers by Christmas like some Oscar things do. But if it comes out nationally on Christmas And from then to Valentine's Day, unless it's specifically a Valentine's-themed movie, any movie in that sort of 6 or 7 week doldrum is almost certainly bad. Because if it was good, it would come out at a time where people were seeing more things, or when other things were not taking away the attention. Most people take their January and see the Oscar-nominated pictures that make it to larger markets that didn't before. Unless the Oscar movie one was on Apple TV or something, but whatever. So yeah, Spies in Disguise, the movie about the spy who becomes a pigeon, that movie is bad for a variety of reasons that you can probably guess. But you know what? At least it's a whole movie. It's not like The Secret Life of Pets 2, which is basically 3 like mini-stories. It's kind of like those mini-stories they've released on the friggin' Minions DVDs just to test the prowess of young animators or something. I'm not even certain why they make them other than to make money. The first Secret Life of Pets sort of didn't make that list that year, but when I found they were making a sequel and that they were amplifying the part of the rabbit, I was like, oh dear God. So I know Kevin Hart's a huge star, but that was a giant mistake, and this movie is terrible. So for a long time, I was struggling to think of which should I put on the best list, Brightburn or Hellboy? And I eventually let off on Brightburn because despite the fact that I don't really like it, I feel like it is well executed in a way for horror movies as far as, especially for one that's as thinly budgeted as this one. There's an act of violence that happens late way through this one that I was surprised they were able to do in a budget this light. And it's something I hadn't seen in a horror movie before. And obviously this one, with its, extremely powerful protagonist, as much as I don't like horror movies where there really isn't a way to stop the guy, this one I kind of got why they were doing that because of the themes of it. You have to see the movie for this. Turned out I didn't even need to debate this because neither one made the list because I accidentally put in 2 number 6s. But whatever, horror's not my bag, so I'm going to go easy on it for a little bit. It's not one of the ones I really hated, like The Bye-Bye Man or something. And that's a pretty good lead into all these sort of movies we get from Scandinavia, where I'm always like, look, I understand that you can make a movie that's perfectly about, like, despair and hopelessness and how you're never gonna get out of these systems, but I don't need to go to the movie theater for despair. I have despair at home. A lot of these movies we import from Scandinavia have that sort of feeling. A lot of the Dragon Tattoo movies or whatever, it's apparently a cultural thing, but every time they try to make one in America, it's kind of Mets. Except for Cold Pursuit, which is just plain bad. Liam Neeson plays like a plowman or something who ends up getting tangled up in this whole thing. His counterpart for the movie is this sort of hyper wimp sort of guy who talks about all the bad snacks he's giving his kids or whatever. There's one point he seems to try to get into a fight with this girl who just immediately dodges him and then grabs him by the nards, and it is the dumbest piece of fight choreography I think I've seen in a mainstream movie in probably 10 years or something. It just doesn't make any sense because this movie is more just a thing to put Liam Neeson, I suppose, on a masculine pedestal to be like, this is what men do and this is what creepazoids do for this other guy. They care about things like refined sugars or whatever. It's almost like Kingsman, where in Kingsman, we don't replace... I should do a whole video on Kingsman eventually because, I think that movie was overpraised, but it's not about, toxic masculinity or whatever. It's more about replacing one type of machismo for another. The chavs they see in that movie are just big and stupid and swear and whatever, but rather than doing that, it's all about well, you wear a suit, you do this, and apparently you still beat people up or whatever if they insult you. It's just replacing one thing for another. And all the things that they see as signs of weaknesses are things that the villain does, like the glasses, or fainting at the sight of blood, or the speech impediment. These things that Sam Jackson has. I'm sure all that stuff is deliberate. But we sort of bring that into this one where we have this, incredibly pointless and cynical story about all these ogres sort of wandering around, and Liam Neeson's just like, I guess I'll just have to do this, whatever. He's fine in the movie. He always is. This was meant to be his last, big action movie, and that didn't turn out to be true, because we'll see him on future worst lists. Ho-ho. Whatever, make the money. Liam, it's all good. Do it as many times as you want. I don't care. I don't care how old he gets. They're gonna CGI out his walker. I don't care. This movie isn't brave or telling us something worthwhile. It's just annoying and smug. I think that, if anything that's going to get something on the worst list, I think being smug is one of the things that will quite often get you on there. That's why Peter Rabbit landed on this list, maybe more than once. Look into the future, oh. You ever see a movie with a protagonist that's just so thoughtless and dim, he just kind of stumbles through life like a total idiot, and just like, how did this even happen? Look, I know Tom Hanks did good in this. I'm obviously not talking about him in this. He's doing good, but they should have shut this movie down the second the documentary came out, because that is so damn good, and this cannot compete with the genuine article. But fine, lob another gold brick at Tom Hanks. He gets more money to do this thing. Whatever, no big deal. I think he got nominated for Best Supporting for this, which is good because he is not the protagonist, as you probably know. All these movies they make about this thing, it's about the person who's writing the story about him, because why possibly make the movie about someone we could give a crap about? But in this case, it's not even really about the journalist. It's a completely fictionalized version of him who's a belligerent ass who punches his dad. And then he meets Mr. Rogers, and then he realizes maybe he shouldn't do that. So remember, kids, don't punch your dad. There's a little bit of insight into sort of the spirit of some of the characters. He has the Daniel, the little tiger puppet who represents his anger and frustration, something that a lot of kids struggle with in their youth before they sort of know how to process it. And if you're talking to someone who, you know, has a little character who represents my frustrations, like, yeah, I sympathize with that. If you watch the documentary, you know that like being good was not something that came immediately natural to Fred Rogers. It was something that he worked at constantly. I almost wanted a scene where the guy is talking to Danny the puppet, and obviously the guy doesn't really feel like talking to the puppet. But what I wanted Fred to say there was, whether you're talking to the puppet or you're talking to me, you're talking to Daniel. A moment like that would have risen that up, I think, considerably. No such luck. Just watch the damn documentary instead. Science fiction has been a way to sort of encrypt ideas about modern day politics or sociology or such things. Captive State is about these, you know, invaders who come from the sky, who they say they want to do something, but all they really want to do is drain the oceans of water or whatever it was that Half-Life had did or whatever. And clearly it's a metaphor for American interventions in other countries. So, but Captive State is still like a fine movie. It's still like, you know, it's obvious what it's going for, but it does it okay, you know, as these things go. Obviously with the metaphors of, you know, Caucasian Americans bearing bombs into places where they shouldn't, like, the metaphor could almost certainly not be clearer. I often point out what the worst science fiction movie of the year is, and Ad Astra is definitely the worst science fiction movie of the year. It is also the dumbest science fiction movie of the year. If you divide, like, money by IQ, it might be the dumbest science fiction movie ever made. It all went wrong when they go to the moon and there's like a neon light for an Applebee's on the exterior of this like moon base area. And I'm like, are people walking around in spacesuits on the outside of this concourse? Do they just pump the endless chicken tenders into your domed helmet? What is this? So then they explore the moon on buggies, and then other space pirates on buggies come up and like attack them, despite the fact that it makes no sense for them to be able to live independently on the moon, or what could they even be fighting for? I guess whatever meager resources they have to try to live out there, but the fact is, like, how could they possibly survive out there unless they're just sitting there eating regolith? And this is all just the start of this journey that just keeps getting stupider. I know action movies can have sequences that lean towards the unlikely, if not impossible. I know this is from the future, but in Sing 2, maybe someone falls and then someone has to swing from something else and catch them. So the odds of them matching their fall speeds or one of them catching, especially when the person who's falling has no rope to grab or something, so the person on the bungee has to match them directly. That's pretty unlikely. If they had a rope themselves and they were trying to catch their rope, you then have like an entire plane that they could interact with and grab the rope and do something else. Beyond that, that is, you know, very unlikely, but that's because that's not really the point of it, is for an action to be like, hey, check that out, because it's animated. It's about the character overcoming their fear of heights in order to save their friend, and blah, blah, blah. The super cool thing that he does in space, where he, I think, attempts to leap from one place to another when there's like this much space between them, it's like, well, yeah. And then 999,999 other times this happened. You went right past it, and then you drift in space forever. So, like, we're getting to the point where it's just earnestly absurd that this could be pulled off. If you told me that this was the sequel that Yahtzee had been working on for We'll Save the Galaxy for Food, I would believe it. It's that astonishingly dumb. A series that has persisted for decades finally came to a crashing halt. One so unwelcome and devastating that all sane observers hope or pray that this will be the end. The plot was gnarled and twisted up into knots by being pulled in so many different directions by so many hands. Maybe this franchise will continue, but there's no enthusiasm for it anymore. It's clearly being made with all the care and love as mechanically separated dog food. Is this the worst movie of the year? No. Let's keep things in perspective. Remember when I told my brother, I gotta go see Shazam because it was better than Hellboy? When this came out, I said, go see Hellboy! Why not? Who gives a crap at this point? 20 years and 2 timelines, and it all converges on this one point where the big conclusion is the Dark Phoenix, again, but worse than The Last Stand. Somehow. This movie really is like Marvel and DC had a baby with all of their shared weaknesses and none of their strengths. Pulling the Dark Phoenix out after we've only known this version of Jean Grey in one other movie is exactly like bringing Batman in for one movie and then killing off Superman after we've only had him in 2. These literally seem like decisions that DC would make in all of their puddle-deep wisdom. So yeah, 20 years of movies, and one of the things that helped launch this renaissance. And I think actually the first thing where Stan Lee had a cameo. That whole thing started in the original X-Men. And it all ends with a pitiful whimper. So yeah, after 2 decades of movies, we wind up with by far the worst one in the entire series. And until they limp over to their new home with the rest of Marvel and with Disney. We'll see how it goes. Thank you all for watching. Rise of Skywalker sucks. I mean, so does Last Jedi. And, The Force Awakens ain't that good. And honestly, Rogue One is kind of shaky. It kind of loses after the two-way part. And Solo sucks complete ass.
Oh, sure, and Playmobil is the bad musical. Look, it is, alright? I just don't have any musical talent, alright? What do you want? Then why'd you do it? I don't know. You say Playmobil, and I say at least it's not Creo. You say Playmobil, and I say go away. You say Playmobil, and I say the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. You say Playmobil, and I say a frisbee still hurts if you take it right in the dick. You say Playmobil, and I say where's my wife buried? You say Playmobil, and I said that guy shouldn't have been standing on that sidewalk if he didn't want to get hit. You say Playmobil, and I say you don't have to mow a lawn if it's on fire. You say Playmobil, and I say now I have a bunch of Mega Blocks mixed up with my legs and can't be bothered to sort them out, so I just suddenly pick up a piece and it doesn't stick to the little pieces. Isn't that great?